formal business to go through before we get to you. Please make sure that your electronic devices are switched to silent mode to avoid any unnecessary interruptions. So, firstly, apologies for absence. Are there any?
Thank you, Chair. We've received no apologies for absence.
Thank you. 2 declarations of interest. Can I ask members to note the appointments set out in item 2 and ask if members have any other interest to declare? No. Membership of committee. Can we note the membership and chairing arrangements for the Economy Committee as stated on the agenda?
Noted.
Thank you. Standing delegation. Can I ask members to note the standing delegation to me as chairman of the Economy Committee as stated on the agenda?
Noted.
Thank you. Terms of reference. Can we please note the terms of reference as stated in the agenda for the Economy Committee?
Noted.
Thank you. And can we agree the minutes from our last meetings held on the 20th of February 2018 and the 26th of March 2018?
Agreed.
Thank you. Our summary list of actions. Can we note the outstanding and completed list of actions?
Noted.
Thank you. Actions taken under delegated authority. Can we note, please, the recent action taken by the former chair under delegated authority in consultation with the party group lead members, namely to agree the letter to the Mayor regarding the Mayor's draft economic development strategy, a provisional work programme for the first part of 2018-19, which is subject to formal agreement by the committee at this meeting, and agree the topic, terms of reference and scope for this meeting, provisional meeting of the 2018-19 Assembly year. Thank you. So, eventually, this brings us to today's main discussion item on the mayoral support for micro businesses in London. So, can I welcome you all? Johnny is going to be a little bit late, so he'll come in shortly. So first, Sue, I always have trouble with your surname, forgive me, Terpilowski. OBE, Sue is the London Policy Chair for the Federation of Small Businesses. Lorna Bladen, Head of Campaigns at Enterprise Nation. Johnny Martin, when he arrives, is the Managing Partner of The Numbers Coach. Claire Burke, Editor of the Business to Business Network, The Guardian. And Jenna Ahmed, Director of Global Insights, Etsy. Right, so we go on to today's main agenda. So if I can ask questions, first of all to Sue, and then Claire. Can you give us an overview of the London's small business landscape?
It's fairly mixed at the moment, but a vast majority of the members are finding it very hard to be London businesses, particularly those that are in some form of commercial property, whether that's as hot desking space, workspace, and particularly if they're in any rented accommodation, because the business rates revaluation has really hit home to those sorts of businesses, with a lot of our members coming out of paying no business rates into having to find business rates, which has added a vast amount of cost to the business. And at the same time, a lot are now coming up to their rent reviews where London is overheating, and we've got businesses in Arches been getting rent reviews of over 200% from Network Rail and TfL for their space, which is something, as you can imagine, as a small garage or something like that, it's almost impossible to encompass and bear. So it's patchy. Some businesses are doing very well, but the vast majority are finding it very hard to be a London business at the moment. And particularly, as I say, it's the small end of the market that's really feeling in pain.
Are you finding any particular trade or industry or profession particularly hit, or is it across the board?
It's fairly across the board. Retail, as you know, is having its own problems and issues at the moment, very seriously, and we're very worried with all that we're hearing in the last month with some of the big hook stores, as I call them, in the high street. The people like M&S is what brings people into a high street. And if those are going to start cutting their shops in the sort of high streets and the areas where our members have shops, and the hook goes, therefore they're going to lose that footfall that that person brings into the area and goes through. The other problem there again is business rates. I mean, it's been absolutely huge for all the retail sector to encompass the fact of the increase in the business rates right across the board, in and out of London there. So from that point of view, it is fairly mixed. I think the people, probably somebody going to mention later on, those that do home working are less affected, and they're the ones that are on, they're sort of able to miss all these sort of things. But from a London's point of view, what really worries me is that these hard costs increase. It means there's not the spare money there to take on the apprentice and do all the other things that London needs.
Okay, thank you. Claire, what's your view?
Yeah, I mean, just agree with Sue. I mean, we hear a lot that, small businesses are struggling with the rents and the business rates. Somebody was telling me the other day about a commercial property, the business rates would be and rent combined would be £100,000, which is quite a lot for a small retailer to pay. So business rates is a massive issue that, we hear time and time again.
Are you mindful of it being any particular industry, Tate, or is there a sector that's being hit harder than others in your view?
I mean, retail is being affected, cafes, coffee shops, but yeah, retail is the big one.
Okay. Let me take this opportunity to welcome Johnny. Thank you for coming.
Sorry.
Thank you. We're just asking at the moment to have an overview of London's small businesses. So in what way do you think that small businesses support London's economy and Londoners? So you can all have a go at that one.
Well, ways in which small business supports London. So the way that we see our kind of startups within Enterprise Nation kind of growing is, I think there was some statistics here about how a very small minority of them are employing. However, what we're seeing is that a lot of the small startups that we're supporting are outsourcing quite a lot. We're seeing a real influx in freelancers, people starting up side hustles, working 5 to 9 rather than the 9 to 5. So they're becoming a little bit more like agile and thinking more about their future career trajectory, because I think that what I'm getting from a lot of the events that I run is with artificial intelligence and the way that technology is moving, they're almost like a little bit kind of nervous about their 9 to 5s. So they're building kind of a more sustainable career for themselves. And I think that will help as technology is becoming far more advanced. They're equipping themselves for the future, not just to sustain their own future employment, but also to help kind of other big corporate organisations.
Thank you.
I mean, micro businesses, they're part of our communities. They're the corner shop that we rely on. They're the cafes where we meet our friends. They're a really crucial part of our neighbourhoods and our communities. You often have a more kind of personal relationship with a micro business. You might get to know the owner, for example. And they, I mean, I'm thinking of something like the microbreweries in Bermondsey. They become a destination in their own right for local people, for tourists. So they're crucial. They're a crucial part of London. They give London its character. They make London vibrant. And, if you're going to a chain restaurant, or a shop, you pretty much know what kind of experience that you're going to get. But, with an independent business, they can surprise you, and that's really important.
Can I bring Jeanette in at this point?
Yes, Chair, it's to follow on from what you're saying and to go back to Sue, because sometimes when we talk in generalities, we miss those areas and those micro businesses, and I'm thinking particularly now of minority ethnic owned micro businesses. And does your organisation have a sense that you can pick up details about them, or are they out with associations like yours, so we don't really know what's happening to them?
We have a good proportion of members that are in that area, and particularly they're the ones that are being really hit by the Arches problem. There's a lot of them around Tottenham, London Fields.
And London Fields I know about.
Yeah, and it's been rid of various other. Brixton obviously is a huge issue, and a lot of those businesses fall into that category. So yes, we have a very good handle on what's happening there. I mean, the other thing I'd like to go back to Susan's point is that we've found in the FSB research is that a micro or small business tends to spend their money locally as well. Whereas if you get in a non-micro and small business into the area running the large chains, it's run by much more commercial grounds and they don't spend the same money locally. And quite a lot of them, it is a social area as well, so they will take in packages for people, they will actually help people in all different other ways, which you don't get if it's a large PLC chain. So they do have a very big social impact that isn't monetary, but is very vibrant to the community.
Well, I represent Hackney, Islington and Waltham Forest, so why I raised this was, if you like, word of mouth and from small businesses in my patch, particularly those owned by Vietnamese, Kurdish, Turkish and Caribbeans and the young men in the arches, they appear to me to be disproportionately affected at this time. And I just wanted to see if that was a sense that you were picking up.
I think any micro and small business which is in the lower end of the property spectrum, which tends to be a lot of those sort of businesses, and others, we've got a lot with the Hispanic community as well, Latino, Americans, Elephant and Castle. All those sort of businesses are the ones certainly that are really finding it hard. And that's because of this change with London getting such a hike in the business rates. What's happened is property valuations have changed across the board, and therefore people are now to upskilling their properties to try and get higher rents. Those are the ones that are being forced out. And we haven't learnt the lessons of the housing situation in London where we let that spiral out of control. We're letting exactly the same thing happen to our commercial property, and we're just sitting back and doing nothing.
Chair, it's so important that we pick up that feeling
Absolutely. I mean, this is
from
such
panel members. I don't know if any other panel members in their areas have picked this up, because we have to be aware of the disproportional effect on areas and particular communities. Has anybody else picked this up? No? It's okay if you haven't.
I don't know about geographically, but I mean, certainly I run workshops at the British Library, and 30 to 40% of the attendees of that would come from minority communities in inverted commas. So I see quite a sort of vibrant, I see enterprise being spread across the piece culturally, but I'm sure it is in poorer property areas that there is an impact on property. Although having said that, a friend of mine runs a user experience design business in West London, and every flipping, shed has been turned into a house there, so there's hardly any office space for him to, and he employs 5 people in his business. So it's very difficult.
Thank you, which leads to more difficulties. Gemma, is there anything you'd like to add on this?
I think our experience may be slightly different. Etsy is a very low-cost startup model, and we actually often find that a good portion of micro-entrepreneurs are starting their business with Etsy for the first time, and I think it's just that low-risk opportunity that digital platforms like Etsy offer in some ways kind of shield you, because you don't have a big footprint. An awful lot of our sellers are working from home. They're working out of their kitchens, their spare space, and so it's less really, I think, they can weather some of the business rate changes, not all of them, but certainly some of them can weather that a little bit better, just because their startup costs are so self-contained.
Yes, of course, and that goes back to Sue's point of the problems we've got of where people have got businesses and premises, and of course if they have to cut down, they do cut down on staff and apprentices, so I take that on board. So we'll now move on to London, a space to do business, so we'll now go on into the where people do business. So I think Caroline's doing that section.
Yes, so starting with Sue and Gemma initially, but this is for everyone, can you set out the main challenges that small businesses face in London in terms of accessing affordable workspace? I mean, I know we've sort of been covering it, but what do you think the main...
The big issue is that particularly in the inner London area is permitted development rights where property has been converted over to residential. So that's had a huge impact as we're losing space at quite an alarming rate. The space that's left is then becoming premium space, and it's forcing out a lot of the micro and small businesses. And we're seeing this a lot with the RFSB membership, we're not losing members, but we're certainly seeing by their addresses, they're moving further and further out from the centre of London because there's not the physical space there for them. And as that happens, is the community effect, as you said before, it's the freelancers that feed into that all losing their food chain, because people are then looking for locals for people to supply them and be agile to come into the company when they need them. So it's changing the whole demographics of the way London is working. And that's why I think it is absolutely critical that we really to look at this as an issue and don't, as I say, let happen what happened to residential. So there is a huge issue on the fact there's lack of space. These glass towers that are going up everywhere don't suit most micro and small businesses. That's not the type of property they want. So it's also looking at the maker space, the type of what I call slightly scruffy space, which is where micro and small businesses like to be in because it's more community-based space. So it is about maybe you can give business to each other and engage to each other. So you want to be able to work together on a flexible basis and co-work. What worries me also is the co-working hub space that was so vibrant in London. It's now being eaten up by one large, very PLC company that's coming over, buying up all those units and running them on a much more commercial basis against the co-working ethos that was there before. So that's a big worry. So I think London is on a tipping point that it has time to do something, but time is starting to run out. And we really do urge the Mayor in the London plan to look to come up with some micro and small business designated zone areas where they're protected. Because if we don't do that, then we will going to lose all that space.
Does anyone else want to come in on that?
I feel hi, I'm Lorna. I feel like at Enterprise Nation we haven't really seen issues around lack of working space. I think there is an abundance of co-working spaces opening up on every street here in London. You know, from WeWork to the Office Group to Work Live, Somerset House have their own creative space. I don't think there's an access to working space. It's, I think, more selling space, so access to customers, getting footfall of potential customers, because, you know, with technology now, you can just work in your local coffee shop, or you can work from home. So I feel, you know, with cloud technology, you simply just need your laptop and a Wi-Fi connection. It's more about getting reach to customers. I think that's the issue. I met with a female founder the other day at an event who's based in Stoke Newington, and she's been pitching for this retail space for 6 months or so. And it's just been sitting there for 2 years, just completely empty. But that landlord is just holding on to it in the hope that the likes of Starbucks or so forth are going to come in and purchase that. And for me, it's how can we incentivise landlords to open up that space within that time before they get maybe a longer term lease. But certainly from working space, we don't see that as much of an issue at Enterprise Nation.
Clarify that, what I'm saying, affordable working space, because the prices are starting to hike up, is what we're hearing.
So it's a different kind. I mean, if you're a person who's working with a laptop and a Wi-Fi connection, you're perhaps you don't have many commitments in terms of, you know, family commitments or whatever. You've got that flexibility to be able to have that, you know, run for it, go for any work that comes your way and be very agile, as I think you were describing it earlier. But not everyone has got that flexibility in terms of their life to be that agile. So actually, for some businesses, they do need to have an affordable space that they can set up a slightly more conventional business that is going to pay all the bills and provide that stability of employment and potentially growing to employ other people rather than outsourcing to other freelancers who are living in just as precarious a situation.
A lot of micro businesses, picking up on what you're saying, Sue, between you know, if you have 3 or 4 employees, really value working in a co-working space, because it means they don't have to take out a lease of, say, 5 years. If they're working in a co-working space, they can give a shorter notice, and also you get kind of, it's easy to collaborate, it's easy to network. Some of these spaces put on events, sort of practical workshops and things. So micro businesses I speak to quite enjoy working in this kind of environment. the shared office space, there's a real range in terms of cost. I mean, some of the more expensive end would be too expensive for a freelancer, but if you had, like, say, 4 or 5 staff, it might be ideal. But there are, I mean, the place that I heard about place the other day in Crouch End, it was a disused council building, and now there are 55 creative businesses, micro businesses working there, and that is a lot cheaper. So there's a variety of this shared office space.
I think big issue at opening up a new space for disadvantaged young people. They're ploughing in $500,000. But I thought that looked really interesting.
Yeah.
Before you carry on, Caroline, I've got Sean and then Fiona. So yes.
I just want to have a look at this idea that businesses are being pushed out across London, because of course London's a very big place. Most of the businesses in the centre, but lots of our communities are out, not nowhere near the centre. That's a growing phenomenon. Is it all bad that businesses are moving out? Because it seems to me that you'd spread some of the social good by putting those businesses further out in London. Is it all bad that they have to move out?
Not all bad, but it is going to change the whole makeup and the ecosystem that London has, and it needs managing, I think, is probably what I was saying to you, is so that if that happens, but what happens to those local businesses? Because what we're seeing is that if you've been used to paying a certain amount of money in inner London, you're quite happy to pay that when you move out to outer London, because that's what you're used to paying. So those businesses that are already there are now seeing a hike in their costs, because the businesses have pushed up the value, so they're now being forced even further out because they can't afford to stay. So it has a knock-on effect, this. And it's what I call, if you look at my business, I started off in the Grazing Road, and I moved down to the Barbican. From the Barbican, I moved to the Old Street. I'm now at South Quay. My business has progressed each time because of rent. That's the only reason I've moved. And each time I brought in my same amount of money I was happy to pay. So, and I've lost people next to me because they couldn't afford to stay there because I was paying more than them. And that's what happens. So the ecosystems all start to disappear. Next door to me in Southquay was a great little company. It employed 20 part-time local people in a very deprived area in Tower Hamlets. They got forced out, and they've ended up in Colchester, was the cheapest they could find a suitable accommodation. And 23 local people are being redundant, of which I know 12 of them still haven't got a job. That's the social impact.
I just asked that because I live on the out zone 6, quite frankly, and everybody talks about the middle of London. Everything's about the middle of London, and it isn't. And to what extent are these changes just natural business progression? Are we a victim of our success in London? Is there something structurally wrong, or is this something that's continually happened? Has it always been going on in London? That we've always, your business starts in the middle because it's small, you are flexible, you have less overheads, you employ people, and your footprint grows, and then you migrate outward. That's effectively what happens with family life for a lot of people. Is this a new phenomenon, or is it just a cost, the accelerated cost that's new?
I think it's the amount of money that the cost is, because London's always been quite vibrant with a local micro small business centre and heart to it. London obviously goes through phases and reinvents itself. But I think having that vibrant inner centre helps all the outer zones because it does migrate out. I think if you lose your core, it's a bit like losing the heart. Everything else then starts to not have the arteries to feed into. Synergy. So therefore it's a synergy of having, if you have a vibrant inner centre, it should be good for the outside. Some migration out is good. I don't say it's bad. But what happens is if you're migrating out, do you stay to London at all, as I say? Or do you start to look at going to other places? And as I say, most micro and small businesses will have an ecosystem of suppliers or people that they buy from locally. And if you take away that money and don't replace it, and the person moving in is a residential business that goes and works somewhere else the other side of London, that local economy loses all that local spend.
Is that It's that current local economy versus the new economy it creates when it goes out of London.
If it stays in London.
Yeah.
If it moves completely out to Wales or somewhere, then it doesn't stay within the London boundaries.
Right, it's lost to London, but probably not to the country. So, okay, cheers, enough for me.
Thank you. I've got two very quick points. One was we saw some really good co-working space when we did an investigation a few years ago, and I just wondered whether co-working space was increasing or whether there was pressure on that in the same way that there is on other business space.
I don't have the figures to hand, but yes, it is increasing in London, and yeah, really gaining in popularity.
We get mixed vibes from members. Some members love it and some members are moving back out of it because things like they want to actually have security and not people ever really listen to what they're doing and what they do. The other thing we've found is that there's been quite a lot of staff moving backwards and forwards, and people don't like that instability of losing good staff and migration. So, but I mean, there is so much around, but a lot of it is now becoming in a bit like what I call the inverted commas Regis syndrome, where you end up with lots of service accommodation, but is it the right service accommodation? Is it the right workspace that's coming in? And a lot of it, where the feedback we're getting is it's coming in, but it's very expensive, and it's been run much more on a commercial basis, whereas 2-3 years ago it was much more enterprise based. So it was more of a community social economic centre and rather than a commercial enterprise.
Similar, so you think that similar price rises are affecting that sort of area of business accommodation as well?
Yeah, and also they've got the problem there is the business that owns the building pays the business rates because it's one entity. Whereas if they were all individual businesses renting, they'd all be outside of paying. So they're paying more proportionally anyway, which I know there's a report coming out that the Mayor's commissioned in about 2-3 weeks' time on this.
Thank you. And then are councils doing enough to free up sort of empty or low-cost space in London?
A few, but not many.
And I think even if they are, it's about that communication and making it clear to small businesses within that borough how it's available and how they access it. I think signposting is incredibly important. I live in the local borough of Camden and I'm pretty tuned in to kind of the startup small business scene, but I'm not aware of much going on in the area. I would love to feed that through to the startups and small businesses that I know. And so if I'm not tuned into it and I'm not getting, sight of what's available, how can someone who's just new onto the startup scene be available? So I think signposting, clear communication is really important.
There's a lot in Camden Lock.
Pardon?
There's a big startup thing in Camden Lock.
Oh yeah, no, I'm very aware of it. I'm there most weekends.
One quick one and then we're back to
What about the variety? Because I've worked in these spaces before, but they're all, if you have a paper-based business or a computer-based business, what if you're producing things? What if you have a business that has quite a bit of footfall, you have a lot of meetings? Is there variety in the kind of spaces that are being provided? Because it sounds to me that they're all of one ilk.
I would agree with that. I think Etsy is a business built on creators and makers of the most extreme ends that you can find. Some of it is a very small and contained amount of stock that you need to keep or how you actually create. Some people are working at scale with big machinery. So a lot of them don't necessarily provide the flexibility that people need to be able to actually create and make things. I think, speaking for Etsy, many of our people, most of them are women. They are people who are starting out in business for the first time and they are businesses as one. It's very exclusionary. You can feel alone at that time. You're sitting with you and a computer, your children running around in the background without necessarily that support. So I think it's also not necessarily about giving people access to workspace. Our sellers often tell us they don't want access to workspace. The reason they've started this, they want flexible business that fits around their lives. They don't necessarily want to scale hugely. They don't necessarily want to kind of go and employ lots of people. Micro businesses are not about one size fits all. But the thing that those maker spaces can offer when they're less traditional, less about plugging in a wire and a laptop, is giving people the network, the support and the social contacts that enable them to build and feel less alone and give them the confidence to keep going.
Yeah, I'm not an expert on the property side of things, but in terms of anecdotal evidence, I've detected that more things are being made in London. My jacket's made by Paladrin in sort of East London. And a lot of my students at the London College of Fashion are finding, if they're making samples and stuff like that, they're being able to get them made in London. So, I mean, I'm just putting that in as a sort of anecdotal evidence that, and a couple of entrepreneurs I know got a sort of lingerie business. They managed to find some space in Soho up in an attic and converted that. And I know this is not going to transform the economy of London, but they did find. I think there's more making going on than you might think. But I definitely think in terms of traditional office space, as I mentioned, my friend in West London really struggling to find anywhere that to sort of for a sort of 4 or 5 people business.
Thank you. Back to Caroline. Thank you.
Back onto yes, the thinking about the problem of dealing with commercial landlords. And I gather the Mayor has set up a new property advice service. So are SMEs finding that this property advice service is providing any help? Sue, do you have any experience of this?
Something we asked the Mayor to set up, because what we were finding is there's lots of very dominant landlords in London, and therefore they have a lot more collective knowledge. And when you're one very small business that are trying to take them on, and they say give figures, or they come back and say that we know that the 10 roads around here, the average is this. If you're one small business with 4 people, how can you challenge that? So what we wanted to do was to start to actually build up a database of knowledge so that people could actually access and say, no, actually, we know it's Y, and you're saying X. That's not fair. You're actually charging us too much. But they can't do that challenging without some form of property advice service and be able to build up this commercial property knowledge centre where we can actually know what the rents are and what the comparables are around the area for local things. So it's something we encourage the Mayor to do, so we're pleased to see it happening. And that's the problem, is that collectively micro and small businesses only know about themselves. So if there's 10, 15 in the building, you will find that the landlord would say, well, I'm going to give you this price, but you're not allowed to tell anybody else in the building, otherwise we're going to throw you out. There's lots of issues where businesses are finding that's happening, and it's just not right. And then we're now finding virtually every single business we talk to are being asked to sign leases outside the Lease Protection Act. You either sign it outside or you can't have this lease. So they're taking away statutory rights from businesses, but when the businesses need the premises, it's really hard for them to fight it.
And is the Mayor's service, advice service, is that having an impact? Is that helping people, do you think?
I think it's too early to see, but it's been welcomed.
Right, okay. And I mean, something else that I think the Mayor set up, the London Open Workspace Map, which is a tool to find kind of useful workspace. First of all, do micro and small businesses find that a useful tool? And is there anything more that the Mayor should be doing to help small businesses find space?
It's a really useful tool. I think there doesn't seem to be a lot of awareness that it exists at the moment, so kind of promoting it I think is really important.
He needs to tell people.
I agree.
It exists.
Be completely frank, I wasn't aware of it. I use a private sector's workspace kind of finder tool called Hubble. So I think it is a great tool, and I'm sure it's very useful I don't know what the traffic's been like. That would be something certainly to look at. But I know that there are private sector organisations who do have kind of heat maps on where to find co-working spaces in your local area. So I'm very kind of conscious about duplication of what's already out there in terms of the business support.
So it sounds like we should find out how much traffic that map has had and how efficient it is, and either advise the Mayor to
part of the problem
use signpost people to existing things that are out there if it doesn't have much traffic.
I think part of the problem, again, it's a really good tool, but the problem is it sits within the growth hub, and therefore you've got to really know it's there to find it. So once you find it, people find it really good, but finding it, as you said, is almost... And I think that's part of the problem, is that now everything's so reliant on the growth hub. I would think the vast majority of businesses in London don't even know the growth hub exists.
So Actually, there needs to be more done to tell people about it, about what's there. What about retail space? Because that kept coming up earlier as a problem to, that finding workspace was achievable, but actually retail space was the problem. Is there any help with finding retail? I mean, obviously there's platforms like Etsy, but sort of physical retail space, is there?
We point people to a company called Appear Here, but that is very expensive for the very kind of, people that have a lot of income, or, a lot of the bigger brands. I would love to see something that highlights what all the councils are doing on kind of a local level. We would point people to that, daily. It's one of the most common questions that we get at Enterprise Nation. Where can we find pop-ups? Where can we find empty retail space? And I don't think there is anything out there apart from Appear Here, but like I said, that's quite expensive commercial space.
So you mean if City Hall was sort of aggregating that information from the boroughs, that would be useful?
Definitely.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Do you find there's a general lack of information going to small businesses about everything? As a previous small business owner, I never knew about, nothing ever seemed to come to me that was going on anywhere. Do you think most small businesses find that? I mean, the owners of small business seem to be so busy just trying to cope with running their small business that these things pass them by without them noticing. Do you find that?
I mean, I think if you're looking for commercial space, you're looking for commercial space, so therefore you do go out. I mean, there are obviously the commercial estate agents and people like that you can find. I think the problem is it's finding the affordable space, because it tends to be those estate agents don't take on those sort of units because they don't earn the right commission on them. So finding the right space is the real problem in London. But I think also London is a vibrant area, so it's also there is this thing about talking to other businesses and finding out what's going on. The problem is, as I said at the moment, is that it is the fact that we have some very dominant landlords that are creating a situation, particularly in London, of upping the cost of the space. And you can see by footprints of what people are generating exactly what businesses they want to achieve, to attract there. And it's not the micro and small businesses, because those are the harder businesses for them to deal with. And London has to make a decision. Maybe that's the way London wants to go, and that's fine, but it needs to tell businesses what it wants.
Thank you. We'll move now on to business and finance support, and Sean's going to do the first question on this.
What are the main financial problems facing micro business in London? What problems are they facing, are firms facing who are looking to grow or just survive? I'm talking things like access to capital, help with understanding cash flow, etc. Is there any help out there?
Yeah, I mean, like one of the big problems are things like kind of late payments, and if you suddenly get like a big order in, then finding the cash to fund that can be a problem. And we talked about rates and rents being a huge problem. I think a lot of micro businesses feel that banks aren't that interested in lending to them. So yeah.
Johnny, what's been your experience around this?
Well, I'm sort of quite positive actually about this. I know there's the anecdotal story, but I think that there's the overall picture on finance has changed dramatically in terms of some of the new initiatives that come through. For example, crowdfunding. To give an example, you mentioned the Archers at Bermondsey. Two guys came to my workshop about 4 years ago to do micro brewing. So I steered them towards Kickstarter. They raised 40 grand on Kickstarter, and now then they raised some more money for some, and that got them going. And like say the lingerie business, they raised some money again ahead of production, so they were selling their products in advance of actually having made them, and they used that funding to get going. You then also got the startup loan scheme, which is an amazing resource. I mean, in terms of you can get up to sort of £25,000 per director if you're for a startup. I'm not quite sure what's going to happen when some of these businesses don't work out, but I mean to give you an example of that, some people who have use that funding. I mean, I ran workshops for the Startup Loans group, and so there were two women who'd been in admin for all their lives. They were sort of their late 40s, and they wanted to set up a dog grooming parlour. So they'd never been able to raise that money from a bank, but they got the money from the Startup Loans, and they set up, and now they've got their own dog grooming parlour going. So I think one also has to recognise that with finance, actually it's not straightforward to raise finance, because often you can be sitting on a good idea, but people just don't recognise it. So I mean, even Paul Smith, the founder of Celador Productions, it took him nearly 5 years to sell Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. People just didn't get it. J.K. Rowling, all these fantastic successes have taken a long time to raise finance. I think the banks quite fairly get quite a bashing, but not entirely fairly, because they're not really in business. Their business model is not around lending risky money, because they only make a small percentage. And I don't think people often fully appreciate that. I mean, I think something like, roughly about 70% of business loan applications are actually go through. But I think what startups need to appreciate is that the banks have never really funded, such risky money. But the Startup Loan Scheme is an amazing scheme, and you've got things like, the Prince's Trust, the number of businesses that have been created out of that. So I think these kind of initiatives are fantastic, combined with, with the crowdfunding, as it were, which can help startups, but also expansion companies. So there's a number of examples of, companies that even with sales, so established businesses, in fact, that banks have turned down, they then turned to crowdfunding. Admittedly, they've had to sell a bit of their business to raise the money, and have gone through. You've also got companies like Market Invoice. So that's a crowdfunding, well, not crowdfunding, but it's an invoice discounter, which, so basically, again, the banks are slightly, in inverted commas, bad boys, in as much that if you go for invoice discounting is when you take your sales invoice that hasn't yet been paid, and you take it to an invoice discounter, and they'll advance money against your invoice. And historically, it was always viewed as a bit of a kind of dirty form of working capital, and you should have got an overdraft if you were a decent company. But banks aren't giving overdrafts, as we know, so it's now become more mainstream. So companies like Market Invoice will give you an advance against a single invoice, whereas the banks will require you to put your whole sales ledger, with them. So things like that are, and then you've got Funding Circle, which gives loans to companies. These kind of initiatives, and they've got artificial intelligence algorithms, which are pretty sophisticated now in terms of reducing their losses. So I think there's quite a bit of, and then just most recently, I had a woman come on my workshop. She wanted to set up an Afro-Caribbean cosmetics business, and I was amazed. She managed to raise nearly £100,000 to set up a business from scratch. So I think there's a lot of money, because the interest rates are so low. There's actually a lot of money looking to get involved in business. So
that leads me on to another question then. What kind of support is there? Because you're saying those things. I happen to be aware of these things. I'm into technology, and often even ongoing businesses will do a Kickstarter to sort of pre-fund their new product, etc. But what obvious gaps are there? What in the provision why a micro business wouldn't have this knowledge, or is there a place that they could go and get this knowledge? Because your notion that it isn't easy to raise money from banks, I think is correct. But if you've just started a business, someone might need to point that out to you, so you then branch out. Is there a service provided by the GLA or anybody else that could give you this sort of information?
I'm a partner of the British Library, and so they've got workshops. I run a workshop there on business numbers and explaining business finance to people. So there is a big issue about explaining the language of business. And I think people that think you can set up a business without understanding finance, it's a bit like going sailing and not being able to navigate. You're going to land on the proverbial rock, as it were. So I think there is a big need for more financial training, just the basics. So the British Library provide that. They've got 100,000 people have been through their doors, not just for finance, but for their other training. And they're also just launching a startup in the library scheme that's been funded through some ERDF money, I think it is. Very much aimed at startups. I think what's exciting about some of the startup loan schemes is that in the early days there wasn't mentoring attached to the money. But now, and you know, I met someone who came to my workshop who had a graphic design business. She got a startup loan. The first thing she'd done is take on an office. Well, you know, what part of increasing your overheads does a startup design business need? So she hadn't had any mentoring to sort of say, look, that's not a very clever idea, really. But a lot of these schemes now have got really good mentoring attached to it. So getting people just to think about the basics of cash flow, how they're not going to be paid on time, and planning around that, and margins as well. Yeah.
I mean, I think there's a lot of start-up help now, with starting up your business in, but I think the area where you do get into problems and there's not many funding sources around is cash flow. So apart from market invoice, there's very few that really specialise in that area. And that's huge once you've got your business up and running. And the banks don't want to know they are withdrawing, again, overdrafts at an alarming rate because it sits the wrong side of their balance sheet. So there's a lot of small businesses out there that are finding the cash flow side of things, and where to get that type of finance is rather harder. So I think now if you want a loan, it's pretty easy. You might have to pay slightly a few percentage points more, but it's pretty easy to get a loan in the market space. And I think everybody concentrates on the loan area, and they don't concentrate on the area that businesses now really need, which is help with cash flow. And the other thing is that most of the schemes that come out from a lot of the GLA funded and also the government funded is aimed at high growth businesses, and most businesses don't want accelerated growth, they want nice controlled growth, and therefore they don't fall into the pocket to get that sort of money.
Gemma, to what extent do things like Enterprise North and Etsy have these sort of what I would call educational conversations with micro businesses, new businesses?
I think from our experience, like for every 1 hour that a business on Etsy spends making, they have to spend another hour on admin, which pretty much sums it up to me. Like, you are so busy, you are juggling so many tasks, you're often doing this flexibly, either fitting around other work, other income streams or childcare, that often just having the time to absorb the sheer amount of information on the volume of tasks that you have to do can be exceedingly complex. And I think I would really agree about the point of helping people through income volatility more so than startup. We actually find that platforms like Etsy offer a very, very low risk, low entry point to starting your own business. A lot of our sellers are self-funding, and when we ask them, what are your plans for next year, actually only 5% say, I need a loan, I want to seek financial support. As Sue says, they're growing very, very sustainably and in a very controlled way. But income volatility and managing those peaks and troughs of when you're starting up, how you're going to grow that business, get that income in, manage the late invoices, manage the late payers can be really quite complex. And when you've got an awful level of information coming at you at once, the simplicity and keeping that top of mind is really important to make sure those messages travel through. And I think to give you an example, a lot of that is about not necessarily controlling the short term, but also helping people plan for the long term. So, for example, 23% of our UK sellers say they're unsure about whether they'll be able to take time off for birth or an adoption, and about the same again, saying they're unsure about whether they could take time off for long-term injury or sick pay. And so really helping people manage the kind of controlled income in the long term, not just focusing at that very start, is really important to them.
That's very interesting. Is there anything that the Growth Hub is missing? Is there a gap in a service or the information that the Growth Hub could be providing around this particular area? Because it's really struck me that the idea that actually you don't just want to start your business and sell it for $1 billion. You want to build it slowly, and you do need to understand cash flow, and there is a lot of help in the initial stage. Is the Growth Fund having that conversation? Is it letting people know that actually you will probably need to go at a slower pace, and you should be looking at your cash flow as much, if not more, than your initial sort of start capital?
Right now, I don't think the Growth Hub sees itself as an advice hub like that. It sees itself more as a pointer. So I know when I was involved with it, the idea was that it wouldn't reinvent the wheel and try and do something else. That it would send you to the Chartered Institute of Accountants if you were interested in those sort of areas. So the whole idea was it was more of a reciprocal to pointer to where you can get the advice rather than actually giving the advice itself. And I would think there's probably a risk assessment somewhere that says trying to give that sort of advice, and that somebody then could come back to you and say, I've took your advice on and it didn't work, might be just an issue. But I think that there is a big problem out there, and I think this goes back to where the mayor can have an influence, which is actually going back to schooling. You know, we should be teaching how to manage finance right the way back there. How do you budget? How do you actually run your own personal finances, and how would you manage? Because whatever anybody says is going forward, that we're going to have portfolio careers. Very few people are going to have one source of income. And this is, to me, is now vital, where you can start to look at really intelligently, what do we need to actually upskill our people in London to be able to benefit from all this. And to me, that's a fundamental skill that needs to be taught right the way back at school.
Okay. Jeanette.
Yes, just following on from that, through the Mayor's office, some real good training material has been produced for school. I don't know if there's one on finance management, but as you say, that really should be on the list of things, given where our young people are going with portfolio campaign. Might be a recommendation that we can explore.
Already recommended it in the Financial Health of Londoners report.
Oh, there you see. Well, there you have it. But we heard it here today from Sue. So thank you. Thank you. Let me just carry on from my colleagues. And a question to Lorna, Gemma and Claire. It's just getting from you specifically what support gaps, or if just one gap you can identify, do platforms such as Enterprise Nation, Etsy and The Guardian B2B address, so that we can be clear about that. Lorna, starting with you.
So it's all about the community. So what I think your role is brilliant at is the signposting, like you said, Sue. But it's that, then what? So, for example, we're doing meetups around the UK with called Funding Circles, where we bring people together with accountants and investors to have that reciprocal exchange of information. I think that's kind of our role, is to bring those communications together and provide a platform for people to not just talk offline, but also online as well. So that's kind of like our role at Enterprise Nation, is to kind of harness that community and make people feel less alienated. And you know, the power of advice is so crucial. It's evident that small businesses that seek advice do better, but I think there's a little bit of kind of nervousness around putting your hand up and saying, actually, you know, I don't know where to go, and that's kind of our role, is to create that safe space. So people.
And online is perfect. What sort of reach do you have then?
We have 70,000 small businesses within our community. A good proportion of those are in London and in the South East, but we are doing more kind of nationwide as well.
Well, thank you. Good stuff. Gemma?
I would agree, actually, and probably don't have a lot to add to that. But I think one of the things that people really value about the Etsy platform is the sense of community they get. We have both online forums and also groups which self-organise into teams, both around geography, skills, interests. And so it really means that people are not only able to feel supported all the way through that journey, like there is always going to be someone there, but it's also groups that allow people to get information out in their own language in a way that they understand. Jargon can be a real barrier for some of these people, particularly at the more creative end of the creative entrepreneur spectrum. They're trying to learn so many new skills, and having the ability of someone who doesn't feel intimidating, is on your level, has gone through it and can support you with the questions that you have, is really important. But I think one of the beautiful things about these teams, as well as they don't just offer a support network, they will often come together to create pop-up markets, for example. We often have something called Etsy Made Local in the UK, where there's a number of these who actually self-organise to create pop-up retail spaces as well, to share and learn and develop about the kind of crafting skills that they need. And I think this is where you kind of see that, you know, some of the support infrastructure we were talking about maker spaces, can really come into its own. Like these women are already self-organising to do this. It's just enabling them to have that low barrier infrastructure to then put those into fruition, which is really, really important for them.
Great. Staying with that, Gemma, Old Street is within my constituency, and I know it well. And TfL recently launched pop-up spaces there. In terms of that sort of disseminating that knowledge about availability, could more be done in terms of the GLA property?
Absolutely. I mean, I think, I think I've already said this before, but I mean, like, for every hour our sellers are spending on making, they are spending another hour on actual admin. They are women, they are mothers, they are carers, they are often like kind of balancing either multiple income streams or full-time jobs. They're busy people. And I think the amount of information that you can take in one day when you're juggling that many tasks is hard. And I think often the kind of marketing that you need to actually reach these people and have them hear it and it cut through all of the other messaging they're receiving in the day about their business is so important. Like, I think it's great that they're there, but in my experience, it's not necessarily universally coming through to them.
No, that's good. And sorry, did you want to come in?
It's Claire. So I'm just going to add something on training. That was all before you moved on. And I think what's interesting is that now we're getting a lot more younger entrepreneurs who traditionally, when you're starting a business, you'd have maybe worked in a company for 10 years or 8 years and then gone on to start a business, and you'd have kind of learnt about purchase order systems and some of the business jargon. Whereas now you've got people coming, much younger, and what I detect with the young people is they're much more willing to learn, whereas sort of older entrepreneurs, or sort of 40 plus type entrepreneurs, are less willing to learn. Well, not less willing to learn, but not necessarily as receptive. I find young entrepreneurs are really, they'll get onto YouTube, they'll find out about Xero or online accounting systems, and they're really quite engaged with learning. But I think there is this issue that they haven't been at work, so they don't really know that much about what business is about. So this idea of trying to get it in schools, and my own sort of pet hobby horse is to sort of somehow have a way that 14-year-olds can go and get a Saturday job. I'm just a believer that the child is the father of the adult. What you learn at as a sort of Saturday job just kind of sets you up, and there's all sorts of insurance and things, and
Well, yesterday I was at a site visit on a college. We were looking at the adult education budget, which is here with the mayor, and went into a jewellery making class, and it was amazing how the students were being encouraged to use Google Learning and Google Platform. And it's to you, Claire, from Guardian B2B. Do you think more could be done, from news outlets like from yourself or from the media to actually encourage people or let them know about there's a world of resource up there?
So to signpost young people, entrepreneurs in general, to the right kind of resources. And we have certainly done some of that. I mean, we've recently done a series called Business Made Simple. We've done events across the UK, and they were about kind of providing insights onto how in-house sort of automation might change their business, for example, how the effects of Brexit, and workshops on key skills such as negotiation. I'm sure, the crucial thing is that people find the right advice at the right time, and that's going to help them grow their business.
Yeah, absolutely.
But certainly what Johnny was saying, I think younger people are a lot more impatient now to kind of get ahead. There's less the kind of mindset that we do our time, we do a certain number of years. They're really keen to kind of get going with their business.
Yeah, that's great. Sue, can I come back to you about the Growth Hub? And I know you said it when you were. Did you say when you were?
I used to be on the London LEP, so the Growth
You
Hub.
were
I was
on-
on the subgroup that worked with Jamie on the Growth Hub.
And when you were involved from your experience, and then if anybody can update that, that would be helpful. I mean, are micro businesses in London aware enough about the Growth Hub? And if not, why not? Because it's there, it seems such a useful thing. It's funded, part funded by taxpayers. It's their hub, isn't it?
People don't know it's there because it hasn't been promoted. I mean, we've promoted it a bit at the FSB, but its problem is it emerged out of a government initiative. And obviously all the LEPs have growth hubs, and all the growth hubs seem to be very different across the country. Mm-hmm. And there isn't an identity or a brand, I suppose, that's really been built up, because it replaced the old Business Link. Business Link, everybody knew, that's where you went to and that's what you got.
Well known.
It was extremely well known. And so the growth hubs haven't really formed any sort of identity. So I think it lacks support. It also... it's a different platform than sort of Business Link, because Business Link had the advisors that went out alongside it, so it had its online face and it had its face-to-face face. This is purely now just online in London. There are not all the growth hubs that operate in the same way as that. There are some around the country that have kept the Business Link model, so they have actually found a funding stream and do face-to-face work as well as just having the web platform. And the web platform is only as good as the content on it, and therefore you need regular editors and content, and I don't think it's got the resources financially behind it to allow it to happen that way. The other thing is, in London there is a plethora of advice all over the place. But the problem is, as everybody said before, is people are busy, and if it's not easy to find, they don't do it. So it's really hard. So you were talking about the pop-up at Old Street. I probably can guarantee you that 2/3 of the businesses that wanted to use them wouldn't even know they were on offer. And that's the problem. So it tends to go around in very small circles, and people that know people will find out about these things in pockets. But there are a lot of businesses out there that would absolutely love that space and that opportunity, and I think that's one of the things that TfL doesn't do enough of, is encourage through its property portfolio when there are empty spaces, is using that a lot more to help local communities and those sort of pop-up businesses succeed.
And of course it has one of the largest advertising spaces in London, which, unless you take the overview and global view, you wouldn't think about. And I know that it's a commercial activity, but it would seem to me, I don't know what you think, that there's a sense in some sort of support or some sort of space being made available with this incredible resource to promote something that the Mayor's linked to, that the Mayor's committed to enabling the growth of small businesses. Or am I being too sensible?
It makes perfect sense to me.
I'm so glad you agree with me. We're having a bit of a fanette here. Thank you, back over to you.
Yes, on that note, retract. Okay, we're coming to our...
Bread and Butter was an organisation, it's a private sector enterprise food organisation, and they were promoting putting people into to Old Street, because I think
it's great space. I mean, it's a totally revived space now. Yeah, as a regular user, I can vouch for that.
Okay, so we're coming on to our last section now, workforce development and support, and Andrew's going to start.
Yeah, perhaps we could start with, I think it was Claire, sort of picking up where you left off, and that's developing businesses, which would require management and leadership skills. So, do you think they're getting that sort of training that they need, and do people need incentives to develop these skills?
I think a lot of people start a business because it's their passion, they spot the opportunity, and their focus is on growing that business and possibly less on the managerial side of things. So I think there is more of an awareness now that obviously running a business, being a good manager is part of that, but perhaps it's not like the primary focus when you are starting a business.
So do you think there's support there for that? Or do you think people need incentivising to learn that? I know when I started off as a lawyer, I was a lawyer, and as you work up the food chain, you become a partner of the firm. And I wasn't trained to be a manager, and I spent more and more time managing rather than being a lawyer, which is what I wanted to do, wanted to be trained to do.
Yeah, I mean, I think they've quite. I'm sure the British Library or runs courses. There are courses out there for business owners to improve their managerial skills, and yeah, it's really important. And how, you know, I think people are beginning to realise that.
But are people actually doing it, or is that just a wishful thinking? Sue?
I think people don't have. I think people just don't always have the time. I mean, I know it keeps coming back to that kind of element of time. You've got, you know, so much to focus on when you're running a business that, you know, it's perhaps not your priority.
Yeah, people are time poor. Also, the courses, as I say, a lot of the time it's coming through funding that's for this high growth programs that are run, and most businesses are just put off by the words high growth and won't even go there. The other thing is that from a business owner's point of view is they tend to be the major earner for the company. So therefore, if they take 2-3 hours out of the day, that's a lot of income lost to the business. So even though they recognise they want to do the learning, sometimes it's just not physically ability. And you said most people set up a business because they have a passion for something. They forget they have to run the business alongside that, and it comes as a bit of a culture shock along the way. So I think, yeah, that's one of the areas where, again, it goes back to if we had a much more entrepreneurial culture in the UK like they do in the States, and it's in our schooling system and it's taught from the beginning, then the next generation coming in will have that very much embedded in their culture, and therefore it would be a natural to them, whereas a lot of people here in a business now haven't had that embedded in them to be part of it. And one of my pet worries is that personal self-development just doesn't exist in today's world, and therefore lots of people don't see the value of why they should be doing this, and I think that's quite scary.
Anybody else want to comment on that?
I think it's also about the type of training that's offered. I think naturally, as people think about how you scale up your business, your automatic kind of thought goes to employ more people, grow. And I think at Etsy, we definitely see our businesses wanting to grow. They want to make more money, they want to expand, but they don't necessarily want to expand exponentially. A lot of them are actually happy to stay as a business of one. And I think when so much training is focusing on managerial scale, it's not necessarily fitting those needs of how you still grow, but grow in a sustainable way where you're not necessarily seeking to employ more people constantly.
Or if you are, it's only one person, which is quite acceptable. You shouldn't need to be looking at this whole programme of exponential growth and high growth. We've seen fixated on that in this country. And let's face it, in any country, that's only ever going to be 20% of your businesses. If you're the most successful entrepreneur country in the world, it's only going to be 20%. So you just keep knocking down and ignoring the 80%. Just to me, just doesn't make sense.
I think also a lot of the kind of people that set up and run businesses are fairly headstrong as well. They kind of got a view as to how things want to do. So they tend to be kind of, you know, we know how to do it, this is how it's, you know, that's why they set up the business kind of thing. But I mean, certainly in terms of skills, you know, like selling skills as well as managerial skills, I mean, those are essential. I mean, there are programs the British Library runs, as Claire mentioned, you know, more general-based programs, as it were. I think time is always an issue.
We run over 150 events at Enterprise Nation, and it's the events on how to market your business, how to use social media. They're the ones that like have the really high footfall. Unfortunately, we have tried to do kind of more workshops based on developing softer skills or leadership or along those lines. But unfortunately, because they are entrepreneurs at the end of the day, they're just out selling and just don't have the time. But I think if we can take small businesses, if we can embed it at a younger age. For me, it was presented as an opportunity to do an ILM course, but it was just optional. I think if we make it mandatory for people at school or university, then that would be a really good thing to do.
Okay, thank you. Fiona wants to come on this.
Just wanted it links to Andrew's point about sort of as he sort of went through the sort of being a lawyer, he became an employer. And obviously there's quite a lot of issues around employment law. Where do people get their advice on employment law if they're not going to courses on it? Because it's a very tricky area that could actually sort of derail some businesses if they got unstuck over
Not
employment
like me,
issues.
because I was an employment lawyer, so it was all right.
No, I know, I wasn't suggesting that you got unstuck by it, but yeah.
Yeah,
The FSB, it's one of our membership perks, so it's free as part of the FSB membership, and it's the most used service we have. And if you start with them right at the beginning with the first issue, they will do the employment tribunal, everything for you as part of the membership. So lots of people join the FSB because of that reason. It is one of our big, if you're just going to join for a social benefit, the employer's benefits, then that's really important. But it's huge. I mean, I know so many businesses now that when I first started, we all employ people. And most of my counterparts have got rid of all their staff now and will use freelancers or outsource to another company. And they cite the employment law regulations. It's such a minefield, and that's one of the big problems with London. You know, it's very expensive to be in London. It's expensive to employ London staff. Now you've got the pensions on top, where the employer has a liability for the pension rights. We're making it unattractive to employ people. And you've got the employment regulations around it. So this is one of my big concerns, is that the more and more you make it unattractive to employ people, the more and more people are going to automate those jobs out of companies. And we're going to have a very different type of workforce, because in London, I call it the hourglass, we've got loads of very high-end jobs, and we've got very loads of bottom jobs, but we don't have very many in the middle management jobs. And those are the jobs that are going to be automated out, because that's where the cost is. And if you take away the middle of the hourglass, the whole thing's going to crash.
Leads very beautifully into your next question.
Thank you. And I've got a question for Sue in the first instance as well. Are you aware of good practice elsewhere in the UK or internationally around support for the self-employed community that would help the self-employed community in London?
Certainly the US, as I said earlier, has a much more entrepreneurial culture. It's embedded right the way through the whole system. So whereas here, if you have a business and you fail and you go bankrupt, you're stigmatised. In the US, if you haven't gone bankrupt twice, you're not a successful entrepreneur. It's a completely different mindset. And therefore, that is something I think here. The German system, which is everybody has to belong to a chamber. I'm not saying that it should be mandatory like that, but there's some benefits in it because you are in a system that makes you adhere to the rules and regulations, and you're all in the same sort of thing. So I think there's a bit we can learn from different societies and way of doing work. I mean, you don't want to take away the entrepreneurial spirit, and you don't want to take away what makes us entrepreneurs here, but there are some lessons to learn. But I think what we need to get away of is, as I say, is this fixation with high growth, and look at what it makes London tick. London ticks because it has this dichotomy of versatility, and that's about the little small people, where you go down to Camden Market and it's 2 people on a market stall. That's a great business for London, but we don't shout about it. Those are the people that we should be championing. Those are the sort of people that make London what it is and what makes it special, and make their lives as easy as possible. And that is very much about working with sensible health and safety regulations, working with, I'm not saying they should be wrong, but it's also, bear in mind, this is 2 people on a market stall. It's not the same as a construction site, and yet because they're outside, they're getting the same walls on them. They're just those sort of nuances is what I think we need to. So I think we need to embrace the best, but also still keep the London uniqueness.
Thank you. And the Taylor Review promised to review the boom in self-employment and ensure that there was adequate protections in place. Do you think the review went far enough, and what other further protections and rights for the self-employed themselves would you like to see?
It went a long way, and they're probably not as far as we'd like it to, because somebody mentioned earlier, if you unfortunately have a long-term illness or something, all your money stops. Most of the time, if you're self-employed or you're, as I say, the main owner of the business, your income's the one that disappears, and therefore there is no backup there. Most small businesses don't have a large cash pool behind them of a safety net to fall on. And if the business goes again, there's nothing there for them to actually have. So I think it's we need a change in our tax system that recognises those businesses should also have a similar support. You know, they don't get maternity pay, they don't get anything because there's just nothing there as the business goes. So it needs a change, and I think it's got to come because, as I said, going forward, the vast majority are going to be portfolio job holders. So I think the whole tax system is going to have to change because I think just the way it works is going to need to change. But at the moment, there's very little support for the self-employed or the owner of the business, that is a national thing that I think really needs addressing.
Okay, and with, I think there's the Social Market Foundation did a lot of research showing that a lot of the self-employed are actually on pretty low wages. What would you like to see in terms of any action on low pay among the self-employed and micro business owners? Is there anything that could be done reasonably, do you think?
Helping them to grow their business so that it comes out of it, and that goes back to using local procurement. One of maybe the things coming out of Brexit is that we can have more of a proactive campaign to actually procure locally for local councils. So a higher proportion is spent locally with local people, and there is a change in mindset because at the moment most procurement people in public sector don't like to deal with the SME community because they find it much harder. They find it much easier dealing with the creators of this world, and we've all seen what's happened with that. So I think there could be ways that people can make interventions by procuring locally and also promoting local businesses. And being advocates for the local community to, you know, people will earn as much as they can sell or produce, or they have earning potential. So the more we help them earn and sell more, the more they're going to get out of that poverty. With most micro and small businesses, you will find the owner is the person that's paid the least in the company, because their dream is to get the company to flourish, and therefore they pay the staff or the people they have to outsource to before themselves. So there is always going to be this inherent thing that the person that does the business is going to be the lower paid. In most cases, not all cases, but a lot of cases, and that 80% I was talking about, it's probably the vast majority of them sit in that bit. And most of them don't have pensions, most of them haven't got the facilities behind them for that type of thing.
Johnny?
Yes, I worked on I think in terms of international things, I mean, the US, they have rules around percentage of purchasing from small companies. And I think that's really brilliant because I worked on a program called Supply the City, which was based down at Canary Wharf, where they had to spend a certain amount of money with local businesses, and that was led to a massive not massive, but I mean, it really helped local businesses to benefit out of a big project. I mean, and the other thing would be as well is to with all this Carillion stuff is that if the council is using service providers to make sure that they pay their, because they basically all goes down the chain. You have a contract with someone like Carillion, and then they have about 1,000,001 other contracts with all the little people, and it's to make sure that they have to pay the little people in the same terms that you pay them. Have a trust account, so you pay your bill, and that has to be go off to their subbies, because that's what happened. That's why Carillion went down so much, as they kept all the money and didn't pay their subcontractors.
Thank you. I think we're getting away a little bit from good practice in the UK to support the self-employed community. I don't know if anybody else has got something I'd like to add to that before I hand back to Andrew.
I think the Guardian at the moment are doing a series called The Alternatives, and it's kind of looking at ways to make the economy work better for everybody. And they looked at my hometown of Preston, who are looking at, the council looking at how money is spent with local businesses to make sure it stays with the community and it doesn't leave the area. So that might be a good case study to go and have a look at.
I think some of the things that Etsy have done in the US, there's a program called Maker Cities that we run, which is really about kind of supporting within local communities. So that can be anything from offering in-person support, offering kind of more flexi retail / maker spaces where you can connect people within the community directly from people who are making in front of you, whereby you've got kind of peer support to actually help people understand a lot more what's going on. And that has been very effective. And there's a number I was just trying to actually find the name of the report, but there's a number of case studies that we can share as well about some of the experiments that have been going on there.
That'd be really helpful, thank you.
Yeah, Brexit. We sort of tangentially came up with that in the last round of answers. What impact's Brexit going to have on small businesses? What are their concerns? What opportunities do they see? Sue, do you want to start?
At the moment, the biggest thing that's happened with Brexit has been the volatility of the dollar, because a lot of micro and small businesses, particularly on the IT web side of things, buy a lot of services in from India and various other places, and it's all bought in the dollar. And they can't hedge like the big companies, so they might quote a job one month and get the job the next month, and if the dollar's gone completely upside down because something's happened with Brexit and it suddenly crashed on the marketplaces, we've had people selling websites for less than they've actually had to pay the developer to charge because they haven't got the flexibility in their system to actually change the pricing. So the first instance on that is just a very short-term thing, which is, as I say, is being mindful of what we say and don't cause crashes and try and keep stability. A lot of our members tend to be UK based, so they're not high exporters or importers, but they are the ones with importers are worried particularly on the food side of things. Some of the unique selling points is that we do a escargot and they're here within 12 hours of being whatever escargot caught at, and that's their unique selling point in having the restaurant, and they're worried if that gets caught at Dover and things, places like that. So they want a seamless as possible system. The other side of things is staff. Obviously, quite a few of them have got EU staff, so they want the security of that. But a lot of people also see it as opportunities, particularly on sort of being able to trade at other Commonwealth countries where English is a spoken language, which has been one of the barriers that we found in our surveys, is that a lot of our members don't export as much because they don't speak the language and don't understand the cultures, and that might bring in some extra points. But at the moment, it's just people are just saying that we just want to know what we need to plan for, because businesses are quite resilient if they know what they've got to do. But one of the other areas that have come to light on Brexit is that if the financial institutions in the city are downgraded, then they might not be able to procure locally, which means a lot of our small micro businesses, the graphic houses and people like that are servicing into them, they might not be able to buy from them in the future. They might be needed from their head office. And that's pretty worrying, because that is a whole ecosystem underneath those financial institutions that might disappear.
Anybody else want to come in?
I mean, I've heard from some small tech businesses that they're thinking about moving to Spain, to Portugal during the transition period. So yeah, there's a lot of talk about moving. Some micro businesses feel like there's less investment around at the moment, and a lot of people just feel like everything is quite uncertain at the moment. They're after detail, and once they've got that detail, then they can start planning.
I read a statistic the other day. I think it was 40% of tech startups are actually started by EU nationals in the UK. So the idea of people going back to Spain or Portugal or wherever is not unexpected, I suppose.
No, it's not a huge surprise. And in other countries, they're kind of welcoming these businesses in. So
there's also a lot of areas where I think people will see that will be much more lightly regulated or more straightforwardly regulated. And so, you've got companies like, sectors like artificial intelligence, driverless cars, where people are recognising that the UK is going to be a good international place to do business. So I think there's a lot of opportunities as well post-Brexit. It was always going to be uncertain. The next 5 years is always going to be uncertain, but the outlook beyond that is incredibly positive for the UK.
Are there any sectors which are particularly affected that we've not considered? For example, construction, where you've got a third of construction workers about to retire, apparently. And what is it? I think I forget what the exact percentage is of workers from the EU are actually in construction.
I mean, this is why it's so good, because what's been happening is that the bosses of these companies have not been training people. You know, they've been reducing their training budgets so that UK-based people haven't been trained, and so they've brought in cheaper labour so they can, maximise their profits and bonuses and stuff like that, as opposed to investing in people in the UK.
I must admit, our experience with the small house builders are they tend to use local people, so they're not so reliant on the EU. I think it's more the bigger companies that are. Is it 2 or 3 of them actually, I think, have recruitment bases in Poland now where they recruit from. They actually have their outsource their HR department over there, and that's where they make an active thing. I think there is going to be an influence, obviously, when there's going to be a change, but what we're hearing is most people want to stay here in the UK, and they want an environment so they can stay because they've made the conscious decision. A lot of them have been here for a long time, and their actual social infrastructure here. Some of them have had children born here, and they don't only know living in the UK. So I think what people just want to know, and I think it's impossible because nobody who's got the crystal ball, is what's going to happen, and then they can plan. But at the moment, Brexit is not as high up my inbox of flooding as business rates. Most of the micro and small businesses is about survival now. And the one thing they're really worried about is can they actually stay where they are, can they afford to keep their business going, and can they still afford all their staff? Because for them, putting somebody off and making them redundant is like losing a member of the family. It's such a personal thing. It's not distance with the big companies where you just send in an HR person and they do it. When they have to make somebody redundant, they really feel that pain. And they are doing this at the moment because they just can't afford to keep their businesses going because the cost of being a London business is so high. And we talk about the London living wage, which is fine, but we should be talking about how can we make London more economically attractive, because otherwise we are going to lose a lot of jobs, and that's going to change the social impact of London.
I think that's a very clear message. Just going back to Brexit, I presume the message you're giving us is you want clarity and certainty rather than what we've got now, some sort of hardly another fine mess you've got us into.
Clarity and certainty, and also be very careful with language. Don't say that we're all going to hell in a handcart, because that affects the dollar. And from our members, that's a real thing. So it's about managing language as well from a Brexit point of view. It's the same, because there is a pre-2019 problem, which is if companies stop making money, they won't even be here at 2019 for Brexit.
Anybody else want to add anything?
Yeah, I agree. I think we should talk up London. It's a fantastic place. We've got some incredible small businesses out there. And if we can think of anything that we can think that the Mayor can do to help, I'm sure he'd be very happy to do so, because it's there are so many employees, there are so many businesses, and very often one forgets about the employer. So many times people will not be employer, but actually these small employers employ so many of our Londoners and are valuable in themselves. So we're now arriving at the end of today's session. Is there anything any of you think that we could suggest that the Mayor does, that we could look into, that would assist small businesses? Is there anything that we've not touched on that you think we should have mentioned that? If I go round and start with you, Johnny.
Well, if you wanted one thing from me, I would say that the training really is the key thing. And the British Library have done research showing that people who've been through their programmes are 4 times more likely to still be in business. And it's this access to training, especially for young people, young entrepreneurs, from everything from finance, obviously my area, but marketing and all the rest of it. So it's the more training that people can have, the better.
Thank you. Jenna.
I think we've touched on a lot of our core concerns. I've been ticking them nicely off my list as we're going along. But I think generally the thing that I would underscore is that income volatility is one of the most pressing concerns that our business face. It's not the start-up cost. They can find access to training. They can find these things if they put their mind for it. But really helping to support people through that level of income volatility and helping them plan for the long term is a core thing that our sellers would really benefit from.
Thank you, Claire.
Something we hear about a lot is a situation where somebody might go part-time in their job and they spend the rest of their time starting a business and running a business. And then they get caught in a trap because they can't afford to kind of give up their part-time job, but they can't grow their business because they only have a certain amount of time to spend on it. So they're kind of caught in a situation where they're unable to grow their business. And like Johnny said, there are options, sort of crowdfunding, but I think, for those people who kind of get a bit stuck in that trap, I think they could really benefit from some advice.
It's also a big leap, though, isn't it, to give up the secure income?
Yeah.
And that's why so many people won't go self-employed, because the onus is on you to make sure you make enough money to pay the bills.
Definitely. If you've got a mortgage, then you need to pay your bills, and you might be desperate to kind of grow your business, but you really rely on those kind of part-time hours. So it's quite a tricky situation, and you hear about it a lot. So.
Very difficult situation. Lorna?
I think everyone around this table, we offer a huge array of business support, and clearly, like our communities as well, they offer a lot of internal peer-to-peer support. But there was one initiative that government used to run, was Mentors Me. I keep getting that question over and over again, is like, how do I access a mentor? It's something we haven't been able to fulfill as an organisation, because we're juggling so many other balls, but that could be something, an initiative to look at.
And Sue?
What I think is missing is more support for the Growth Hub, without doubt, and how we can make that much more vibrant tool, I think is really important for London. But where I feel the missing part is what I call the teenage businesses. So there's lots that start up, there's a lot for high growth, but those that are just there in the middle, that are, quite a few of them have never been outside of a recession. They set up when we were in a recession here. Helping those businesses become more sustainable and grow to just a little bit further ahead, but not, as I say, take it off to try and rule the world. There's no support out there for them. So there's nowhere for them to go to and actually go for, say, well, how do I just make that little increment step, or how do I get over that brick wall I've hit? Because I've got 6 people and I want to get to 8 people, and there's a big difference when you get to those sort of little areas. And there's nowhere really that caters for that, and there's no real support out there for those sort of businesses. And we've got a lot of them here.
I think you've all shown there's such a complexity of different problems in so many different areas, and so finding a fix would be very difficult. Do my colleagues have anything else to add? Or?
No, I think it's just going back to Claire, and I think she touched on it, the impact on women, and of course the childcare and all of that. So if you add in your scenario, I've got a business, doing it part-time, and got a job part-time, and I've got babies and children to rear and a family. Is there more? I mean, this year we've got, what's the mayor's hashtag about?
Behind every great city.
Behind every great city. Claire, from a media point of view, have you picked that up? Is there more you would like to see in terms of women entrepreneur with the whole kit that they come with?
Yeah, in terms of, I had a baby last year, and it's quite I know quite a lot of people who are kind of thinking about starting businesses who've just had babies to manage the work-life balance a little bit better, and running your own business can help that. The cost of child
2018-19 is set out in paragraphs 4.2 to 4.6. Agreed to use its meeting slot on 19th of June for a site visit and roundtable discussion with micro business owners as part of the evidence gathering process for its investigation. Thank you. The next meeting of the committee is scheduled for the 10th of July at 10 a.m. in committee room 5.
Thank you.
Right, there's no any other urgent business, so that concludes the meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.